Good Wednesday morning. In the last two Beatitudes, Jesus spoke about the blessedness of those who are persecuted. Before we leave off on that, I'd like to pursue that topic of persecution a little bit more. Let me frame it by asking a bunch of why questions. Why is it that persecution seems so uneven, so inconsistent? In other words, there are people in places of the world that are suffering horribly just for being Christians, while we here, mostly in America, can practice our faith freely and openly, worship without fear of repercussions for the most part. Why is it that it's always been that way? Why is it that John the Baptist and James were beheaded, but Peter gets miraculously released from prison? Why does God seem to be so arbitrary is not quite the word for it, but uneven maybe in the distribution of the persecution? It may help us to read this passage from Hebrews chapter 11, the great chapter of faith. Listen. And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Stop right there. So far we have fairy tale endings. These people are acting by faith and they're doing heroic things, and God is working wondrous things for them, even to the point of resurrecting some of them from the dead. Great. Sounds good. The Lord is taking care of His children. But then we continue reading. This is verse 35 now. And others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. No fairy tale endings there, no resurrections, no miraculous rescues. These folks remained faithful to the bitter end, and some of them had a bitter end. Why is that? I don't know the answer to the why. Since we don't know those answers, let's don't dwell on it. Let's dwell on what we do know. It does say here that they were looking for a better resurrection. It says in verse 16, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. These people, whether their story ended out badly or well, they were faithful because they knew that this life is not all that life is, that they're expecting a better life in the very presence of God, and it's worth dying a miserable death, if that's what it takes, to be in His presence. And I pray for me and for you that no matter what days ahead are like for us, that God would help us to be faithful and strong and to maintain a consistent testimony regardless of the circumstances around us, regardless of how much suffering we have to undergo, because we know that it is better to be in the presence of the Lord than here in this place. May God help us to be faithful today.